With a too-real queer narrative and a horror-inspired sci-fi universe, Mattie Lubchansky's debut graphic novel Boys Weekend has a little something for everyone. The uniqueness and humor of Lubchansky's popular digital comics is blown to even larger proportions in this full-length adventure. This story features Sammie, a newly out artist assistant who is asked to be the best man at their college friend's wedding, in a narrative that is just as adrenaline-boosting as it is emotive. This graphic novel immerses its readers into the dystopic playground of Campo, an impressively detailed world filled with crypto bros, pyramid schemes, and monsters. One might be unsure whether to laugh or cry when reading Boys Weekend, but any audience is certain to be entertained and delighted by this epic tale of a bachelor party gone wrong. Well, thank you so much for being with us, Mattie Lubchansky. I'm so excited to talk about your debut graphic novel, Boys Weekend. Could you give us a little synopsis of Boys Weekend?
Oh, sure. So it takes place in like the late 2030s, I want to say. I honestly can't remember now. But it takes place a little bit in the future. And our hero, Sammie, is a trans person who's been out for like a year or so. And they are asked by their old college friend to go be the best man at his wedding and then go on a bachelor party weekend to a sort of like libertarian, anything goes floating island in the Atlantic.
So what was the inspiration behind Boys Weekend?
I think less time had elapsed from me coming out to my friends from college as trans, but I was my friend's best man in Las Vegas. This was now like 5 or 6 years ago. It's a long time ago now. And I had sort of, it was a different sort of experience, obviously. They're like my real friends. They're not nightmare people.
Yeah.
It started out as a sort of like, I wanted to do something maybe autobiographical about it. And I started writing it, and it just wasn't interesting because I'm not interesting enough in my general like week-to-week work, play around with genre and things like that. And I've always been really drawn to sci-fi and wanted to write more of it. So it just sort of like naturally started getting further and further out there until I had whatever is in there.
So some of the characters are based off people that are in your life?
No, not really. There are mostly composites of different kinds of people that I know. No one's like, there's no like one-to-one, here's this person is this person. Like Sammie is sort of based on me. Our names are similar enough. And it's sort of based around what my life looked like at the time. But nobody's like, I did a lot of like very heavily fiction, or I very heavily fictionalized everything. Mm-hmm. It's not like Romana Clef or whatever you call it.
How did your friends who were a part of that kind of experience take the book coming out?
That's a great question. I got very ahead of it where I sold the book and I like immediately texted everybody like, you're going to see this book. And I promise it is not what it looks like. Because it's not really, I dedicated the book to them. It was very sweet. Actually, I went on like a little tour when the book first came out in June. And I think there was only 1 or 2 events on the whole tour that one of like the guys from the trip were not at an event, which was very nice. It's like most of the people, say, on that trip didn't understand it or whatever, were not my friends,
Yeah.
Much like Sammie in the book, a lot of the problems that I was having in my life were mostly because of a lack of communication on my part even, I was not being honest with my friends. I was being withholding of information for fear of like how bad it might go or whatever it was.
So you put a lot of thought into this world, Campo. I love in the pages, if you like look long enough, you can catch like different things that are happening in the background. So what kind of things inspired like that world that you built?
Oh, sure. So the 2 big sort of like stylistic inspirations for that were, I grew up really watching a lot of The Simpsons when I was a kid. I taught myself how to draw watching that show, and also Futurama, which both those shows are so good at telling not just jokes, but doing like solid sort of like world building and like tone setting with gags in the background. Like, you can do a lot of not just making a joke, but also building out the world and setting the sort of heightened reality with like what's a business that would exist in this awful place, And the other like less fun thing that I always think about a lot when I'm doing like world building is Margaret Atwood's Oryx and Crake, which is one of my favorite books. And, she does such a good job of like sort of projecting what the future is going to be like. And it's not like super out there stuff. It's all like I'm drawing two straight lines and sort of interpolating what the world is going to look like in 15, 20 years. Like I think that book was written in the 90s, right?
Something like that.
And it takes place now-ish, maybe a couple of years ago now. The vibes that it predicts of how the world is going to go are becoming more and more true in a way that's really fascinating. And I was just trying to sort of take that sort of eye towards not just like telling just jokes, but maybe trying to figure out where things would be, given the setting and the people that are in charge.
I think one of your characters specifically is really interesting. Erin, who's this woman with this group of kind of hypermasculine, toxic men. Why did you choose to put her in that group?
Sure. So, it started out as, like, the group itself is a lot of characters, and they are not hyper distinguishable from each other, and this is on purpose. I sort of wanted to overwhelm the reader with the amount of boys, because that's what sometimes these strips can feel like, or these sort of very heavily male settings. I went to engineering school. Like, I just sort of I have a sort of understanding of what these settings are like. And it's just a thing that I noticed, is that there's often, they will allow one or two women to be hanging around, and there's also, I think, I was trying to sort of present a sort of like shadow version of Sammie in the group that presents a different kind of friction that these other guys would have, in my experience. Most cis women I talk to have thought about their gender more than cis men generally. Just because you are forced to. I'm not telling you, you know this, but like that you are forced to because society makes you, right?
Yes, right.
And men can just sort of like, cis men can like just sort of flow through their life and not think about gender in any real way because they're not challenged by it. There's just sort of like, I wake up in the morning and I go to work or I do whatever I want, and no one ever makes me think about the fact that I'm a man, really. Whereas women are thinking about it all the time. And so this is a person that would understand Sammie even less. That's like, I've thought about it and it seems crazy to be a trans person to her, like, why would you want this thing that I don't want, almost, that she feels stuck with? Sort of representative of societally the ways that trans people are treated.
Yeah.
It's not just cis men that are, causing problems.
Right, because it's like, in a very specific way, some ways she's even worse because Sammie expects like, the femme energy, we'll bond, she'll understand. And then Erin, she's probably one of the rudest people in the whole book. Yeah. So it takes Sammie a long time to kind of confront Adam, the groom, about this misgendering that's happened like the whole book. Why do you think it took them so long to have that conversation?
It took me a long time. I think it's hard. It's scary. You don't know how people are going to react. There's sort of like the best case is they'll apologize and still keep being bad at it. If you confront somebody about it in a lot of cases. And the worst case is, a fight or something physical or worse. There's lots of bad ways that it could go. And it's scary. You don't know what like lurks in the hearts of your cis and straight friends when you're in the middle of coming out. It's like a sort of touchy, weird process with those people. And, like the big problem with Sammie in the book is that they're not like upfront about this stuff with these guys in any real way. And it just gets further and further away from them until it, breaks. If someone is misgendering you constantly or, even if they're told even at all, they're like the idea of trying is sort of BS to me, because you're either doing the work internally to think about it or you're not. And if you refuse to engage with another person on their own level or take them at their own word, like why are you sort of like trying to exhibit this ownership over another person in your life, which happens a lot with old friends, family, that kind of thing.
Some writers find it kind of therapeutic to write about this stuff from their personal experience. Is that kind of how you found Boys Weekend, or how was it to like have that kind of connection to yourself?
Yeah, I think all the stuff in the book that's sort of about like oh, your life is already pretty good back home. Like Sammie's got this great partner and there's like a queer life back where they live that they're sort of forgetting about, some. And the idea of sort of like, oh, I've got this community that's right here, was sort of something that I came to almost simultaneously while I was writing it. And that was very therapeutic. And the other stuff about I don't want to get too deep into it's like the only spoilable thing in the book with the stuff with Aaron that we were talking about, that one scene. That stuff about sort of, let's just say broadly, self-acceptance was a thing that was one of the last things I put into the book, and probably the most me pointing at myself in the mirror, like, you should probably read this kind of stuff that's in there.
There's been kind of a number of queer graphic novels that have come out recently, like Magic Fish, Laura Dean Keeps Breaking Up With Me, Heartstopper. Why do you think that graphic novels are kind of this safe space for the queer community and so popular?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. There's if you go to not like the indie comics conventions that I'll go exhibit at, like the Small Press Expo in DC or TCAF in Toronto's a big one. You go to these and just it's a massively queer space. There's just a lot of queer people there. And I think it's because comics are, for better or for worse, taken less seriously by the mainstream sort of critical world, publishing writ large. It is a sort of I think it's changing very slowly as the sort of kids that started reading comics during the big YA boom 10 years ago are getting older now. So who knows where things will be in 15 years, or 30 when those children are publishing executives,
Yeah.
But it's a really queer space because I think just nobody's paying attention to it on the same level. The barrier for entry is much lower for that. The gatekeeping is not really there in the same way because anyone can sort of publish a comic and take it to one of these things and get readers or post it online, what have you. It's really, I think all the time about the barrier for entry being really low. Anyone can make a comic. You don't even have to be able to draw, really, truly, to get started. So I think it's just a really nurturing environment in terms of it's really easy for amateurs to get into, and no one's telling you not to do it. And it's just a really easy way to sort of say, here I am, here's what I think, or here's a story I want to tell, without too many people getting in the way. So I think just a lot of marginalized people generally have found their way through comics. And right now there's just such a strong queer presence in comics that it's, at this point, I think, self-replicating.
So along with graphic novels, horror is kind of like a genre that a lot of the queer community has found a space in as well. Why do you think that there's that connection? Yeah,
I mean, I think it's a lot of the same reasons. Is that it is, again, another thing that was taken less seriously by both readers and then, the film industry, whatever. Horror is, it's more,
like the slasher films.
Yeah, it's just, and I think it's also, I think horror is a great vehicle for camp, which, queer people love. I think it's a lot of the same stuff. I think it's just sort of it's considered a more, I can't think of the word I'm thinking of, but just a less sophisticated thing.
Yeah.
And therefore, we are all able to get our grubby little hands on it. And it's also, horror is another thing by which you can really express feelings of being marginalized quite easy. So much of it is externalizing these internal things with the grotesque or, scary stuff generally. So I think it's just a really good vehicle to talk about a lot of things, even if you don't, you could just make something that's scary to be scary on its own. But it's just, I think, again, low barriers to entry.
So you usually have kind of a 4-panel format. Online you have a lot of comics, but this is your first full graphic novel. How was kind of the transition to getting a longer format? Yeah,
so I've been doing a lot of short form work for years and years. I've had a webcomic running since 2009, I think, or so.
Wow.
And those are all mostly 4 panels. Sometimes they're 6, sometimes they're 10, whatever. And then I was doing a lot of work for the Nib for 10 years where I was an editor as well. And occasionally I'd do a comic there that was a couple of pages, like nonfiction stuff, but that was never where my energy was being put. It was mostly like weekly cartoons, either about politics or social issues or gags or what have you. But I always wanted to, I sort of like fell backwards into doing shorter work. I really originally was always wanting to do long form fiction. In 2020, I drew it. It came out in 2021 with Silver Sprocket, which is a small publisher in San Francisco. I did a book called The Antifa Super Soldier Cookbook that I'm still really proud of and I love. That's a more straight like satire front to back about stuff that was going on at the time when I was drawing it. But that book's about 60 pages. So that was like a nice sort of, I'm really thankful to them, and I will probably work with them again at some point, hopefully, to make more work that length kind of thing, because I really did enjoy it, and it was a nice sort of way to get my feet under me in terms of like telling a longer story. And I think it really shows in this book where I had a better feeling of how to write something that long. It was a strange experience, honestly, because I'm just so used to, I draw something and I put it up and it's online the next hour, and I'm getting feedback instantly from people telling me they love it or hate it or whatever, yelling at me, emailing me, whatever. But this book, I finished it and then waited 14 months until even I saw a copy of it.
Oh, wow.
Which was very strange to just be sitting in my house for over a year, wondering if people are going to like the book or not, you know? And even now, it's still so opaque. To just be like, well, the book's in a store. I don't see every person, not everybody at the store has to like look at the camera and give a thumbs up if they like it. It's not the same kind of experience.
How long did it take you to make this, like writing and drawing?
Yeah, I would say it took me a couple of months to write it. It took like months of developing it. I spent a lot of time before I sold the book, like outlining it, thinking of the story, talking it out, revising it, sending it to people. So that work is sort of harder to quantify in terms of how long, because it was on and off for months of sort of outlining it. But once I sat down to write it, it was about 2 months of writing, and then I think about 12 months of drawing. And I work what is considered fast in comics. I'd say a lot of people work a lot slower. Doing a whole graphic novel is a real slog, honestly. It's a lot of going over the same stuff over and over. That's another thing, while there's a lot of those background jokes in there. That was just me keeping myself amused as I went over this page for the fourth time, because you write it and then you pencil it and then you ink it and then you color it. And it's just sort of, by the end, I've just seen all this stuff so many times that I'm just adding little things in the corners just to keep myself sane. Yeah, for yourself. You mentioned you used to do engineering. What kind of prompted you to shift from engineering to being a cartoonist and an illustrator? When I graduated high school, I wanted to do art. It was sort of the only thing I liked really doing, but it did not seem like a lucrative career one could go into. I will say now, it also doesn't seem like a lucrative career you can go into, but there are at least many comics programs at art schools, which were not there 20 years ago in the same way. At least there's a lot of MFA programs now that do graphic storytelling, and that just didn't exist. There's maybe one or I don't know when SCAD and RISD started doing it, but it was basically didn't exist. It wasn't known to me anyways. So I was just sort of, well, I need to do something where I can go get a job after school. And I did. And about a year into engineering school, I was like, well, I hate this. Because I was decent at math and science. I say was, because I stopped being good at it. But I was competent enough in physics and calculus or whatever. And I just was like, well, this is lucrative enough and I'll go into it. And then in school, I realized I hated it. And then I went and worked as an engineer for about 5 years and hated it every minute of it. Oh my gosh. And then, I don't know, maybe a year out of school, I just started I went to some night classes at the School of Visual Arts in New York that were like comics, because I was completely self-taught at that point. And I just wanted to sort of brush up. And then I got my then girlfriend, now my wife, got me a tablet for my birthday in like 2008 or something, or 2009. And I just started drawing a weekly comic then. I was doing it at night. I was drawing all night, all weekend. I was like working for years, just sort of trying to like make a career out of it. And then eventually I quit engineering and I was working as an assistant to a glass blower.
Okay.
The only job I've ever been fired from. Because I wasn't very good at it and I had a bad attitude, but it's fine. It's very similar to the job Sammie has in the book.
Yeah, I was thinking that, yeah.
Yeah, so I just, at that point, when I got fired from that job, I was close enough. I had enough paying clients, and I was in the middle of writing. Me and my wife wrote a humor book that came out in 2014 or 2015. Now I cannot, 2016. I can't remember. It's called Dad Magazine. But at that point, we were writing that book. So it was just sort of like, well, now's the time to sort of take the plunge and try it as like a full-time job. Mm-hmm. And it's worked out so far. But I still wake up in the middle of the night sometimes, like dreaming of AutoCAD, and one day I'll have to go back because comics is going to fall apart completely.
Oh my gosh. Well, congratulations on having a debut graphic novel after that whole journey. Yeah. You have kind of a background of like political comics, and they have some dystopic elements to them. Have you always been interested in the horror genre?
I was a baby for a real long time about that stuff. And I think the last 5-10 years I've been getting more into it. And so I still have a lot of holes in my sort of like horror knowledge. But it's always been interesting to me. I've always been really into like science fiction, and like the sort of like scarier sci-fi stuff has always been really appealing to me. So that's definitely where that comes from, and just a long fascination with like, dystopian things. Yeah, I think a lot about like the far future, or the ideas of, and this is the next book I'm working on now, is about a thing that takes place further in the future. And it's sort of like about people attempting like a utopian society. So I'm just very fascinated with the sort of like the ideas by which society is organized, and like the conditions under which that can happen, stuff like that.
Well, so you already are working on something for the future?
Oh yeah, another book with Pantheon that'll be out in 2025 sometime.
Awesome. That's so exciting. What do you hope that people take away from Boys Weekend after reading it?
I think there's a couple of things. For like a trans person reading it, I hope it is cathartic in some way, which is always a lot of people have told me that after reading the book, which is always a nice feeling, because there is sort of like a big emotional catharsis at the end that I think is sort of like laser directed at trans people in a way. And for everybody else, I hope it is at least. I don't think books can make us understand each other better or like fix actual problems in the world or anything. But I do hope on some level that it can, at least like a window of some understanding into somebody else's experience. Mostly I hope people are like, enjoy themselves reading it. I'm not, I don't think it's like a polemic or anything. I don't think it's my political speech is elsewhere.
Yeah.
For the most part, it's suffused throughout the book, I'd say. But it's not like, oh, you need to feel this way or you need to think this thing. It's mostly a work of entertainment, I think.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Mattie, for being here, and thank you for writing Boys Weekend. It was super enjoyable.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for having me.